You're listening to the Wes Food Podcast, episode 15.
Michael, one of the things we're trying to teach kids here is not just how to concasse a tomato or clarify a consomme. We're teaching them part of being a cook means we get there. And I said, Chef, I would get there if I could, but I can't. And he said, that's fine, Michael. You have your work, we have ours. We're chefs. We get there. We like it like that. And he hung up.
This episode is brought to you by Twiki. Twiki is an internet streaming solution that lets you watch your favorite UK programs directly on your TV, no matter where you are in the world. To find out more, go to www.tveaky.com.
Welcome to the Wes Food Podcast. Each week we bring you interviews with chefs, cooks, and foodies. Now over to your host, Wesley Kuttner.
Today we're talking to Michael Ruhlman, author and chef, so let's get started. Michael, you're a great cook in your own right. You trained at the Culinary Institute of America to be able to have the authority to write and cook, and it's changed your life. You've gone on to write some of the most acclaimed books on cookery, and I'm a fan of your book. Michael Ruhlman, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Michael, would you say that you found your calling to write about food?
I think the calling found me. I never set out to do this. I always wanted to be a fiction writer and tried and failed for years. And then was just being a freelance magazine person and editor, and wrote a nonfiction book, which got my book started and my book writing started. And then I thought, wouldn't it be cool to go to the Culinary Institute of America and learn what the most prominent cooking school here said you need to know in order to be a chef? It was 1996. The country was just becoming fascinated by chefs, and I thought it was a great opportunity. And I love to cook, and I was curious about it. And that's how I made the decision to write about chefs. I expected to get in and get out with the story. What I didn't expect was that it was going to change my life.
But Michael, that's such a high target to aim for, the CIA.
Well, why not aim for the highest?
Exactly. A lot of chefs are a bit humble and they think, oh, well, maybe I wouldn't be able to manage that kind of level. I mean, you really handled it pretty well.
Well, first of all, I wasn't a chef. I considered myself a journalist. And I'd been interviewing a lot of chefs in my hometown of Cleveland, and they all seemed to have come from the Culinary Institute. So I knew that was the most prominent school. That's how I found out about it. And I've interviewed a lot of high-profile people, so interviewing experts didn't really intimidate me. This book needed to be at the best place, and so it made perfect sense.
Michael, without being too new agey, because a lot of people obviously think of this, when you become aligned with a certain profession, things come to you. Did you feel that it was like a mystical thing in its essence that you achieved working with some of the greatest chefs that most chefs dream of working with?
Actually, I do. First of all, I didn't expect to actually become a cook, but I found out early that I couldn't write about what it meant to be a cook and a chef without becoming one, because so many of the changes are internal. Once I got out of there, because I determined to become a cook myself and did ultimately do that, then wrote a book about it, I was then left bereft. I'd finished the book, but it wouldn't come out for 9 months. I couldn't sell any other books. I didn't have any good freelance money coming in. And so I thought, hey, I want to keep writing about this profession. I'll get a job as a cook. I'll pay the bills and keep learning. Mind you, I'd never published anything nationally about food. And I was broke. I was looking for a cook's job. And I went out to meet a woman I knew was well connected and could find me the best chef in Cleveland to work for. But she was out in the middle of Ohio and out in the sticks at a restaurant actually called the Sticks. And I walked in there. I said, can you find me, here's what I want to do. Here's the catalog copy of the book. I want to keep writing about this. I want to keep learning. Do you have any ideas where I can get a job as a cook in Cleveland? And Susie looked at me. We're sitting in a banquet at her empty restaurant. And she said, God, I didn't know you did all this. I'm working with Thomas Keller, and we're looking for a writer for his cookbook. And suddenly the world just sort of starts shaking, because at the time, Thomas wasn't known the way he is today. He was known among chefs as that monk out of Yountville that nobody really knew who he was or what he was doing, but everyone wanted to. He was the beacon everybody looked toward. So a broke writer, unemployed, unknown, walks into a tiny barbecue joint in the middle of Ohio looking for a cook's job and basically walks out with tickets to the French Laundry to write the cookbook with then the best chef in America. I really have a sense of, God saying, Michael, I know you want to write fiction, but you're good at this, and I'm putting you here. And that's how it happened. And so I do think there was some divine providence involved in getting me out there, because I went out there and then I had not only the culinary fundamentals, which is what you come out of a school with, is just fundamentals. You have all the tools you need to learn the rest. And then I went to the place where I could begin to learn the rest, the place that took those fundamentals to their farthest reaches. And that was an extraordinary gift.
Well, I think you were well suited to working with Thomas Keller. You would not have received that opportunity unless you were ready for it, because you're an incredible author. I happen to have read a few of your books. The French Laundry, of course. I've cooked possibly 70% of the recipes in that book, and I find them very refined. I didn't want to change anything that I read in the books. I normally take the books that I read as inspiration, and because I don't know what it was. The way the book was written and presented, I wanted to pay homage to the book. And every time I served those dishes, I always said, this is from the French Laundry. And the reaction of the people was, wow, because it was like you've taken us to the restaurant.
Well, then you did a great job with those recipes, because they're exacting and they have numerous steps. I mean, nothing's really that hard. They're just so many small steps involved.
You have to put the effort in, Michael. You really do. And I think it was because of that book that I thought that I could take my cooking to another level. Because in those days, I was in the middle of my private chef career when I purchased that book. And because I really followed it, I thought, wow, I really can do much better. I've never worked in a kitchen such as the French Laundry, of course. I've worked in very fast-paced kitchens that are understaffed, and then gone on to cook myself single-handedly for private families and on yachts. But it gave me a kind of a sense that I wish I had worked in a team like that kind of restaurant. I kind of felt, I really did miss out in not working in a good team like that. So well done, that book. Very well done. And of course, Ratio was the first book that I read that you authored. And that enables chefs to just be free of any recipes. I don't think enough chefs know about this book. Can you explain a little bit about Ratio for people? Because, it's one of your first books?
I think it was published in 2007. So
it's one of your earlier books, yeah.
Yeah, it's been a while.
I don't think chefs understand how essential that book can be to them.
Well, you'll have to tell them. Spread the word, please.
Well, maybe we can do it on this podcast.
Okay.
It really is worth a good, and also it's on Kindle, and I also downloaded the app. I've always got it.
Yeah, I'm proud of the app. The app is good, and I like that, and I'm very proud of Ratio and the way it's been received, because it all comes down to the fundamentals. That's what I write about: fundamental technique, and ratios are the very bedrock of fundamentals. Ratios are simply proportions. It makes us understand that recipes aren't really a list of ingredients that come together in a certain way. It's proportions of one ingredient relative to another. So you don't think of a bread dough as being 20 ounces of flour and 12 ounces of water, and then a specific amount of yeast, a specific amount of salt, and maybe whatever flavoring, internal garnish you might want to put in there. A bread dough is fundamentally 5 parts flour to 3 parts water. And that's all there is. You need a little yeast, you need a little salt, but the fundamental essence of bread is 5 parts flour, 3 parts water, which means you can say, okay, I want to make this much bread, so I'm going to say I'm going to use 500 grams of flour and 300 grams of water, and figure out yeast, which is about salt, which is usually about 2%. And yeast, doesn't really matter how much yeast you put in determines the time of fermentation arising. But if you understand that, then you can make any number of types of breads, and then you can vary it because you can make wetter doughs if you want to. And a lot of the best breakers do want a very high percentage of water, much higher than 5-3. But once you know the basics, then you can branch out. And that's true of just about any of our preparations, whether they're custards or cookies or stocks or sauces. And when you know them, you increase your skills as a cook by 1,000-fold.
It's a unique book. I don't believe I've seen it anywhere else presented in that way.
I haven't. No one had written about it. I'd first learned about the concept of ratios at the Culinary Institute of America when I interviewed one of the team leaders, Uwe Hessnar, and we were talking about cooking and stuff and the media and cookbooks, and his shelves were bulging with cookbooks, and he turned to me and said, "See all these books? You see all the television shows and all the websites? I can give you all that in a page and a half. Would you like to see it?" And I said, "Yes, I very much would like to see it." And so he handed me his own ratios, and they were not done by weight, but they were done by like a pound of butter and 6 yolks equal to hollandaise. It didn't account for the acid in it or the aromats. It just had pound of butter, 6 yolks equals a hollandaise. And I love this paring down to a food's absolute essentials. He looked at me, said, "I would like to sell that for $50, but no one would buy." But I love those ratios so much that I had a friend with really good handwriting write them out, and I framed his ratios and put them on in front of my kitchen sink and would stare at them as I did the dishes. And I kept thinking about them and thinking about them. And I realized that I couldn't stop thinking about them. And when you can't stop thinking about something over the course of several years, I figured it was time to explore the idea in a book. And so I set about creating weight-based ratios and writing a book about it.
But Michael, I find it hard to believe that you're doing the dishes at home.
Well, because I did so much cooking, I made a mess of the kitchen, and my wife got fed up with all the fancy stuff I was learning at culinary school and said, "If you're going to cook, you're doing the dishes too."
Yeah, good for her. So how did you accidentally become a chef?
People say chefs, I became a cook out of love, and I want to share my love, and I cook from the heart. I really learned to cook out of anger. And it happened 3 weeks into my time at the culinary school, and I write about it in The Making of a Chef. But there was a big snowstorm on the day of a practical there, and I was 25 miles north of the school. The Hudson Valley was shut down, and I couldn't get there. And so I called Chef Pardis, and said, "Chef, I'm not going to be able to make it in for today's practical." And he said, "Okay." And I said, "No, you got to understand. I really want to be there. I can't get there." He said, "Okay." And he was upsetting me because I knew something was going on here. And I said, "No, you got to understand. I'm taking this seriously, and I would be there if I could, but I can't." And he said very quietly, not in his chef voice like he did in the kitchen, he says, "Michael, one of the things we're trying to teach kids here is not just how to concasse a tomato or clarify a consommé. We're teaching them part of being a cook means we get there." And I said, "Chef, I would get there if I could, but I can't." And he said, "That's fine, Michael. You have your work. We have ours. We're chefs. We get there. We like it like that." And he hung up. And I was trembling. My heart was beating, tapping our little infant daughter on the back, and it's still in her bathrobe because the snow's coming down. And I told her what happened, and she said, "So basically he's calling you a wuss." And then when I didn't really respond to that, she said, "Oh, you are not driving 25 miles through a blizzard to make a bechamel sauce." And I drove 25 miles through a blizzard to make a bechamel sauce, and that's what changed my life. I wanted to say, "F you, Pardis. I'll show you I can cook and I can get this book done." And it was that day I determined to be a cook. That's why I became a cook. And then how I became a cook was learning the fundamentals at the Culinary Institute. And then I got a job in Cleveland as a cook while we were waiting for the French Laundry book to happen. And then I worked out at the French Laundry, doing prep work, hanging out in the kitchen, interviewing purveyors. So it was a lot of self-education, working in kitchens, hanging out in kitchens, and paying attention and writing it all down.
So it was a kind of divine anger.
Perhaps a divine anger. That's an interesting way to put it.
Yeah, I studied a bit of Buddhism, and they were saying, well, anger isn't all bad,
No, anger motivates.
Exactly.
Fear motivates. You've got service in half an hour and your stations are ready, fear motivates, let me tell you.
Have you ever had these moments in the kitchen yourself when there's absolute chaos around you, and because you're doing something so intricate and it has to, you're focusing on it so much, there seems to be like a complete peace, like you're in the middle of a hurricane or something, you're in the eye of the storm, and there seems to be this peace, and you don't realize how stressful the situation was until afterwards.
Yeah, that's part of what you learn. It's you do get into that kind of groove, and you become super efficient when you're there. It's like you're walking along on through an airport concourse, and suddenly you step on a conveyor belt, and you're walking just as fast, but you're moving twice as. You're walking just as fast, but you're moving at twice the speed.
That's a great way of saying it.
And that's the effect of what you describe. And when you've got 6 or 7 or 8 cooks in the middle of a heavy service, and everyone is in that same place, everyone is aware of where everyone else is, everyone is aware of where they are in each dish, what they call the dance. That's a great and elating experience.
And it can become addictive.
Perhaps, and that's why cooks are cooks, even though they make crummy money.
Crummy money. Love that. Love that. Well, not all chefs do. A lot of very good chefs now are coming in. They're crossing over to the private chef realm. More and more families are saying, okay, look, we want our own chef. And that's what I've been doing for the last decade. The thing is, the anger is not allowed in a domestic situation. There's no place for it.
No, I know. It's hard to imagine because you need a certain amount of anger if you're trying to get a lot of stuff done, but people expect you to be cheerful and bubbly and, No, it doesn't. Yeah. It
doesn't go down well. Even if you go all quiet, they don't like it. You've got
interesting. You've got to be engaged. So that's part of the. You got to factor that kind of stuff into the work. And I guess prepare for that. I'm gonna lose 20 minutes chatting with mom when she comes in. About her day or whatever, and the food that we're cooking, and why am I doing this and why am I doing that?
Oh, they'll come in and they say, "Oh, I'm just going to leave the kids with you. Do you mind showing them how to make pizza?" You can't say no.
Wow, yeah, that's a kind of you go with the flow. You're a cook and you get it done.
I quite like it when the kids come in. It's a good.
I think teaching kids to cook is the way to make our whole food system better. Actually.
You get them young and you teach them, what a cauliflower is or what a carrot is. I think later on they'll start to ask for those things. If you just push onto them pizzas and what are those things they have in the States over there? Those cheese.
Yeah, grilled cheese sandwich.
A grilled cheese sandwich. I got asked to do one. American family came on board and they asked me to do a grilled cheese. So I literally put cheese on the grill.
Oh,
they had a good laugh. I had no idea what a grilled cheese was, so they came and showed me, and I love them.
Oh, that's funny.
I love them.
I love a good cheese. If you've got a good bread and you butter it well on the outside, you've got good cheese inside, and you cook it just right so the cheese is all melted and the bread is nice and browned on the outside. That's nothing wrong with that.
I've got a question here from a fellow chef. He's also a private chef. He used to work at Arzac, and he worked also for Ferran Adrià. He's an American guy from Colorado. And I had him on the show. He wants to ask you, what do you think about sustainability and zero waste in restaurant kitchens today?
Well, it's really just starting to be addressed by Dan Barber, Blue Hill at Stone Barns and Blue Hill in Manhattan. And he's actually had entire tasting menus made from what used to be trim and garbage, and shown that you can do that with fish heads and fried fins and things like that. So he's really pushing the envelope. But, I don't see it really zero waste at a restaurant. The work is so hard as it is. I just don't see chefs doing it in any large numbers just because it's very hard. You have to be very organized and committed to make that happen. It'd be nice to see that happen, but it's difficult, Plates of food come back uneaten and cooks overcook something and it's got to be dumped. And, you've got all this trim and who has time to take all these potato peelings and figure out some creative way to put them to use. It's a lot of work. So I don't foresee that really happening soon, though I hope it does, because I think sustainability is, an important issue we need to address, and no one fully understands what it means to be sustainable and how to make it financially sustainable as well.
Well, the first thing I do when I start a new job in a restaurant or hotel, I go straight to the rubbish bin. That was the first thing I think we learned at catering school. The chef was Lausanne trained in Switzerland.
Mm-hmm.
It could have actually been the first class we had. He said, this is the most important thing. Don't waste your ingredients because you're going to lose your profit. Go straight to the garbage and see what they're throwing away. And I'll never forget that lesson. It's been a very important lesson. I found all sorts in the garbage can. I found cutlery, you name it, plates, everything.
Right.
Yeah.
But you're right. I remember I was interviewing Rocco DiSpirito long ago for Gourmet Magazine, and he talked about his first job where it's some restaurant, and I think in Hyde Park or Jamaica Queens somewhere. And he remembers the chef making him squeegee out with his finger every last bit of egg white of every egg he used, because he wanted every bit of egg white there. And that's where that chef learned not to waste, because you apply that to everything else. If it's worth the time to get that last bit of egg white out, think of all the other stuff it's worth the time to do.
Yeah, there are quite a few chefs that are excessive and manic. I've worked for a few, but they seem to getting much cooler. The social skills are getting much better.
Oh, yeah. One, they're getting smarter. Two, they're realizing that screaming doesn't work. As Keller said to me, I eventually realized that if I was screaming at a cook, it was too late. I hadn't done my job. Also, as more educated people entered the kitchen, as the kitchens became more watched, the need for a higher level of professionalism sort of entered the kitchen. And so I think it's been a great thing. The women used to be treated horribly at kitchens. Now I think they're treated much more fairly and as equals. So that's been a great change in kitchens over the decades.
Well, I'd like to see the women treating us well in kitchens.
Yeah,
it's going the other way.
The other way.
Yeah. Could you tell the listeners what the most important sense for cooking would be?
I sure can. Common. We have 6 senses. We use all of them to cook, but our common sense is paramount. Yes, we always have to be tasting. We always have to be looking around us, looking at the food we're cooking, imagining what should look like versus what it is looking like. We need to listen for the sounds of cooking, how the oil crackles when you put the meat in or does not crackle. Touching the food is important. We have to touch the food. And of course, always be tasting. But again, I think using our common sense is something that is underutilized. Just thinking, just making good choices, using your common sense.
It doesn't seem to be very common.
It's
common
not.
sense these days.
Certainly not the home cook who's got their head in a book reading a recipe and something goes awry and doesn't make sense and they don't know what to do. You need to think about what happened. Did I cut this too thin, or did I not get the oil hot enough, or is the oven not hot enough? Why did this happen? And cooking is not, it's not rocket science. It's pretty basic. It's pretty simple, and you can figure stuff out on your own. And the more you figure stuff out on your own, the more you know. The more you know, the better cook you are.
I was a bit saddened the other day, Michael, when I saw somebody watching some cooking videos. And I've got nothing against people watching cooking videos, and some of the best videos on cooking are coming from Chef Steps. I'm sure you've heard of them.
Mm-hmm.
But I just think it's sad that people don't take the time to read a recipe and absorb it in their mind. Because a cooking video can take 5, 10, 15 minutes to watch, and they're very highly polished, very well produced. But something like your recipes are very concise, very clear. It's so easy to read a page and put that in your head and just go off and cook. Yeah, what's happening to not our generation, but people in their 20s and 30s that aren't really interested in reading. Do you find that's... Do you think maybe it's going to go the way that they're going to be just looking at apps on their phones?
I don't know. I think they're always going to be reading recipes. I don't think you can cook from a video. You can only cook by doing it. And I think reading and thinking about it is the best way to accomplish a good dish and to learn from the cooking of that dish. You know, I wrote a book called Ruhlman's 20 Techniques, 100 Recipes, A Cook's Manifesto, because there are about 20 things you need to know in order to cook anything, in my belief. And the first chapter is called Think. And thinking involves reading a recipe, as you said, absorbing it, cooking it in your head, you know, imagining the steps, thinking about it. Thinking is really underrated in the kitchen. And I think that we need to learn how to think better in the kitchen. And until we do that, we're always going to be sort of hampered.
Yeah, it's like people don't want to own what they're cooking.
They want to say it's out of this book. It's not mine. It's a recipe. And also these recipes and their highly polished food studio shots, which make the food look really good when their dish doesn't look as good as a studio shot that's been fussed over for 4 hours, they feel like they've made a mistake. It's their fault. And so I think, that kind of relying too much on recipes and what they're supposed to look like can actually make you feel like you're a worse cook when in fact you're not.
Good point. Yeah, they could feel underwhelmed.
Mm-hmm.
And discouraged from continuing.
Exactly.
It's very difficult to impress guests these days because when I go on the aft deck and I see the clients, the guests, the yacht guests, the first thing they do is they don't touch the food, they don't smell it, they don't say, what could it be? The first thing they do is they take out their smartphone and take a picture and they start sending it or posting it to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
They're all doing it now.
I know.
They're all doing it. But they're not actually appreciating what's there and smelling it. It's great. They're using it like a status symbol to say, look what we've got for lunch or dinner.
Yeah, they're using it for a social interaction, and they're putting a device in between them and the food. So they're not really experiencing the food the way it's meant to be experienced. So they are missing out. On the other hand, there's an argument to be made that it's good to share information this way, to share what kind of food is out there for those who care about it. So it's kind of a double-edged sword in my opinion. It shouldn't be the first thing you do on every single dish. But if something is impressive, perhaps every now and then. So rein it in is my advice, but know when it's valuable and know when you need to be in the moment here.
No, I didn't mean to go down that road. It was just, people have very high expectations now because they're going to, there's so many more Michelin star restaurants now and restaurants with extraordinary accolades. And most of the chefs my age never had a chance to go and work in those establishments. So we have to present our food in such a way that would be as good as the places that they're going to. And that's what helped me when I read your books. It helped me put myself there. What do you call it when you have an out-of-body experience?
It's called an out-of-body experience, I think.
Okay. I would have to imagine myself working in a kitchen that you'd worked in, such as the French Laundry, because it was the only way I thought that I could not get found out, because you're made to feel as though you're an imposter these days because you're not interacting. Private chefs don't interact with other chefs and work in other restaurants anymore because they've left working in restaurants and hotels. So it's kind of like a limbo. Difficult to explain it, I guess.
Being a personal chef as opposed to a chef at a restaurant?
Yeah, I would say it's difficult to get back into a catering establishment again, because there are a few reasons why they wouldn't want you back, because you think that you know it all, or, I don't know. I don't know what their reason would be, but there is this feeling that a lot of personal chefs have that they can't go back into mainline restaurants and hotels.
I think that they shouldn't feel that at all. I think they'd pick it up very quickly and they'd feel either quickly comfortable and enjoy it, or it would remind them of why they left the professional kitchen so that they could cook on their own in people's houses. All of it is valuable work. It all depends on your temperament. I think some people prefer working alone. Other people need a group. They need the pressure that a group puts on you.
One of the things that I can think of would be the quality of the produce, because I can choose what I'm going to cook for a guest. And if I go to a restaurant, I'm told that I have to use this cabbage that's maybe 2-3 days old. Whereas if I'm cooking for a guest, I can go and choose my cabbage that day. They're eating something absolutely fresh.
Well, that's something that, yeah, you're right. Chefs don't, restaurant chefs really don't have the luxury of. They have to either work at a restaurant that has high standards for the quality of the produce, the quality of the fish, or they're at the mercy of that bad quality because, a chef is only as good as his ingredients.
In fact, that's the only opportunity I have to release my anger is when I go and shop. Let's say I've got to go to the market. It's not enough for me to just go to one stall. I've got to go to all of them and then decide which one I'm going to shop at, or which butcher I'm going to choose, which fishmonger, which veg man, and that's where you get angry with yourself to, pick it up, move. Don't sit down and have a coffee and a croissant when you're in the south of France, which you'd love to do because you're off the boat, but fill your trolley up with the most amazing produce you can find, and that's where the anger kicks in. That you've got to push yourself harder, because you don't know when you're going to get the opportunity to shop again.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So that's when I can get angry, is when I'm off the boat and I can just drive, really use as much anger as I can to propel myself forward.
Interesting.
And then it's a relief when I'm back on the boat again. Then there's kind of like a period of like, okay, I've made it and I've got enough for the next 3-4 days.
And that feels good.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's a good way to release your anger.
Interesting. Shopping. I haven't heard that. That's a new one.
Would you say that all the recipe books have been written?
I know what you mean. And I thought that a lot.
There's a lot of recipe books out there. There's a lot out there already.
Yeah, I've been saying for years that we don't need more cookbooks. We need more technique. There's a million recipes out there, a million books. Why do we need more books? People keep buying them, so publishers keep publishing them. It's how I make money, so I'll probably be doing more in the future. I'm not working on one right now, but Brian wants to do a bigger book on pâtés, terrines, rillettes, and that arm of charcuterie. And I know a publisher wants it, so they're always looking for new books because that's how they make their money. And so we're always going to be seeing cookbooks, and people want new cookbooks. They get excited by them.
There's a lot of fat in charcuterie. What's your take on fat? Because I love the stuff. I'm trying to get my clients to accept that it's good for them. I believe it's good for you.
Yes, there's no conclusive. There's certainly evidence that certainly we know that our bodies need a certain amount of fat. It serves a function in our bodies. We've been trained to believe that fat makes us fat. Fat doesn't make us fat. Eating too much makes us fat. Eating too much refined wheat and processed foods is probably the biggest thing that makes us fat. People need to understand that fat is good, fat is flavor, fat is not bad for you, especially the very good fats found in nuts and avocados and in deep water seafood. If it's quality pork fat, I think that's good for you too. Well, most doctors will say that's too saturated and you'd want to limit it, but you don't need to eliminate it completely from your diet. Everybody.
That's used heavily over here, Michael, in Spain, where I am.
Oh, well.
Heavily used.
I think it's great. I mean, you guys are so smart over there, as they are in Italy, that, Italy makes lardo, and just pure cured back fat, and it's fabulous if it comes from a well-raised animal. Again, we've been eating this way for millennia, and we haven't had the sickness we've had since at the very time, the sickness, at least in America, began at the very time where we were warned not to eat fat. That's when we started getting fat, because we started eating non-nourishing foods. Well, when you eat a little bit of fat, your body feels nourished and it doesn't feel hungry and you don't overeat. And so people need to understand that fat is good. Fat isn't bad. Stupid is bad.
Have you spent any time in Mallorca?
I have spent, alas, no time in Mallorca.
So you wouldn't be familiar with a pastry that they make here. It's only made here. It won't work anywhere else. It's called ensaimada.
No, I don't know it.
It's a pastry made with pig fat.
Oh, that's a great fat to use, especially the leaf lard. It's a great fat for pastries.
It's an amazing pastry. It's one of my favorites. They have all sorts of fillings. If I can, I'll try and send one over. It really is worth sending. I'm not sure if they can be mailed. I'll see if I can get one sent to you.
What I need to do is get back to Spain, one of my favorite countries, period.
Yeah, they have such a, I don't know if you can call it, I would say that the Spanish cuisine could be older than Italian. Maybe you could tell me if that's true.
I can't tell you for certain, but I think that because of the way the Roman Empire moved up into Italy before it moved into Spain, Italian cuisine developed earlier. But I don't know. You'd have to go back and look at trade routes of civilization, and that's where it began. There's certainly people in Spain cooking, so it's hard to say where the modern Spanish cuisine versus modern Italian cuisine, or what would become the modern Italian cuisine, began.
I'm going to have to do a podcast on that, find out if it's true.
Good idea. It's fun to explore that kind of thing and the way food traveled and moved, and often it was the cuisines were based on preserving food because that's how, a community stayed alive. So that's why charcuterie has been so fascinating, is because that's one of the first forms of cooking, was to cure stuff so that you could keep it all winter.
I tried to explain to somebody the other day because they were saying they love fresh food. And I said to them, did you realize that the best foods aren't fresh? And she just looked at me like I was crazy.
Mm-hmm.
I said, well, cured ham's not fresh. Sushi's not fresh. The pickled ginger isn't fresh. All these amazing food we love, they're not fresh. Even the wasabi is not fresh.
Some of that can be. Anything that comes out of the ground can be fresh and can be good in its freshness, especially like fruit and lettuces, of course. But you're right. There's so much great food that's a year, if not 3 years old.
Yeah, jam isn't fresh, is it?
No,
it's preserved.
It's preserved. So much of what we eat is preserved. We don't really even think about it.
Maybe there's a book in that.
That could be part of a new book. That's true.
There you go. Are you going to eventually write your novel that you've always dreamed of?
I just published last fall a collection of novellas that have nothing to do with food. They're more love stories than anything else. It's called In Short Measures. And that was very gratifying because it's always been a goal of mine to publish fiction. I'm currently working on a book about grocery stores in America, where so many people get their food, but nobody really knows where it comes from. So I'm kind of looking at our grocery stores and writing a nonfiction book about that. I'm just starting working on a project with Jean-Georges Vongerichten to write a kind of letters to a young chef from that very talented, very smart chef based in New York City. So those are the things that I'm working on now.
That's fantastic. I'm looking forward to reading those. If people want to visit your website or your fan pages, could you supply those websites on the podcast?
Certainly, yeah. My site is simply my last name.com, RUHLMAN.com. It's got all my books and all my bio and all that stuff in it. I'm on Twitter and try to answer questions there, at Ruhlman, RUHLMAN. Google my Facebook page, and it should come up. So I'm easily accessible, and I try to answer emails, and I try to answer questions on Twitter for those people who do have questions. I try and stay in touch with people who are trying to cook better.
Michael, it's been an absolute privilege to talk.
Oh, you're too kind. Thank you. I've loved this conversation. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Look forward to speaking to you again, and take care.
You too. Thank you very much. And if I'm ever in Spain, I'll try and look you up.
Please do.
Okay.
Thanks for being on Westfood.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Ciao, ciao.
Bye-bye.